The morning I woke up to my own face trending online, I was still half dreaming of balloons and laughter. The pastel ribbons. The cake with my baby's name written in white frosting. My sister-in-law's arms wrapped around me for the photos, her smile wide, her eyes warm. But by dawn, those same pictures were everywhere, twisted, edited, and weaponized. Anchorwoman's pretentious baby shower, a desperate grab for fame. The captions cut deeper than any knife, but what hurt most wasn't the headlines. It was knowing that only one person had access to those private moments. My sister-in-law, Rachel. She'd offered to host the shower. Told me to just relax and enjoy it. And I did. For one blissful afternoon, I actually believed I was surrounded by love. But I should have known better. Because in my family, affection always came with strings, and this time, they were tied tight enough to choke me. If you think family always protects you, listen to what happened to me. My name is Clara Vance, and I'm 33 years old. I used to believe I'd built the perfect life, a stable marriage, a career I loved, and a calm sense of control. But the morning those photos leaked, that illusion shattered faster than the champagne glass I dropped when I saw the headline. I was a morning show anchor, the friendly face people trusted to start their day. I'd spent years fighting to be taken seriously, working longer hours, smiling through exhaustion, refusing to let anyone see how badly I wanted respect. Rachel was there through most of it. She was my husband's sister, a PR consultant who always knew the right words and the wrong motives. When she offered to host my baby shower, she said it would be good optics, a family-centered image before my maternity leave. She called it a gift. I didn't see the trap until it closed. By noon, my inbox was full of questions from producers, colleagues, and strangers who suddenly thought they knew me. They called me entitled. Fake. One even said, "She's everything wrong with modern women." That afternoon, my network suspended me for image protection. That night, I sat alone in the nursery, surrounded by unopened gifts and shattered trust, and realized this wasn't just about Rachel. It was about every moment in my life I'd mistaken control for care and silence for safety. But to understand how I got there, you need to know what came before that day. I grew up in a house where silence was the loudest sound. My parents weren't cruel, at least, not in the way people imagine when they hear the word toxic. There were no slammed doors, no shouting matches that shook the walls. My mother preferred quieter weapons, long glances that made you feel invisible, small sighs that told you you'd disappointed her again. My father, on the other hand, was simply absent, in body and spirit, a man whose love was reserved for things he could measure, grades, trophies, achievements. I learned early that affection was a reward, not a right. My older brother, Ethan, got most of it. He was brilliant, a debate champion, varsity athlete, their golden boy. At dinner, my mother would hang on his every word while I tried to disappear into my mashed potatoes. When she did look at me, it was always to correct my posture, my tone, my appetite. You'll never get anywhere if you don't learn to control yourself, Clara. By 12, I had mastered the art of invisibility. But invisibility has a price. You start mistaking neglect for peace. You start believing that as long as no one is angry, you're safe, even if no one is really seeing you either. The only time I felt seen was when I performed. I'd put on little news reports with my mother's hairbrush as a microphone, announcing the weather or pretending to interview our cat. My father would chuckle if he passed by. My mother would sigh and say, "Maybe focus on something practical." Still, I kept doing it, every chance I got, because in those pretend moments, I was heard. I mattered. When I was 15, I entered a regional speech competition without telling them. I practiced in secret, in front of the bathroom mirror after everyone was asleep. The night before the contest, my mother found the flyer. She didn't scold me, not exactly. She just asked, "Do you think anyone really wants to listen to what you have to say?" That question carved something permanent inside me. I won third place the next day. When I came home with the certificate, she hung it on the fridge for a week, then took it down and replaced it with Ethan's college acceptance letter. That's when I understood. Love in our family wasn't unconditional. it was earned, and even then, it could be revoked. After high school, I went to college on a partial scholarship for journalism. My parents didn't come to orientation. My mother said she had a migraine, and my father was too busy. I remember standing there alone, surrounded by other students posing for family photos, trying to smile through the lump in my throat. The campus felt like another planet, loud, alive, and mercilessly honest. My roommate, Tessa, was everything I wasn't: fearless, messy, loud in a way that didn't apologize for itself. She said, "You talk like someone's always grading your words." She was right. I didn't know how to speak without editing myself first. For years, I chased approval like oxygen. Professors, bosses, men. I needed to be liked, because liked felt like the closest thing to loved. The first man I dated in college, a senior named Marcus, was charming at first. He said I was composed and mature. I mistook those words for affection, but slowly I realized what he really meant: quiet, compliant, convenient. When I landed an internship at a local news station, he grew cold. "You'll be surrounded by men all day," he said. "You love attention too much." I should have left. Instead, I apologized. That pattern, apologizing for my own ambition, followed me into adulthood. By the time I was 24, I had clawed my way into a junior reporting job at a small TV station in Chicago. It was grueling: late nights, low pay, and constant pressure to look perfect while pretending not to care. But for the first time, I was doing something that felt like mine. When my parents visited the station once, my mother smiled politely at the set, then said, "So, you just talk on camera all day. Must be nice not having real stress." That night, I cried in the bathroom stall at work. Not because her words hurt, I was used to that, but because part of me still wanted her to be proud. Even then, I didn't realize how dangerous that craving was. When you grow up starving for approval, you start confusing attention for love and manipulation for care. You'll do anything for the smallest nod of validation, even from people who don't deserve to give it. It took years before I understood that people like my mother trained you to attract people like Rachel. I met Rachel when I was 27, shortly after I married her brother, Tom. Tom was nothing like my father, or so I thought. He was quiet in a gentle way, soft-spoken, reliable. He loved that I was driven, called me the responsible one. After years of chaos and control, his calm felt like safety. Rachel, on the other hand, was magnetic. Everything about her demanded attention: her perfect hair, her tailored blazers, her voice that filled every room. She was a PR executive, used to being the person who decided how everyone else looked to the world. The first time we met, she hugged me too tightly and said, "Finally, a woman in this family who knows how to dress for success." It sounded like a compliment, but something in her tone made me feel like she was sizing me up. Rachel was the kind of woman who made generosity look like power. When she offered help, it was always phrased as a favor you'd owe her later. When she praised you, it was because she saw a use for you. Tom adored his sister. He said she was the glue that keeps our family together. I tried to believe that too. I told myself she was confident, not controlling. I told myself she liked me, but Rachel didn't like anyone she couldn't manage. She inserted herself into everything: our wedding planning, our first home purchase, even my career. "Media's a tricky world," she'd say. "I can help you polish your image." She'd critique my clothes, my social posts, even the way I smiled on camera. Always with that same sugary tone: "Just trying to help, sweetie." And I let her. Because I had been raised to believe that love and criticism were twins. That people only corrected you because they cared. It wasn't until my first miscarriage that I saw the first real crack. Rachel had posted a family photo the week after, captioned, "Family is strength, especially when life tests you." She hadn't asked permission. I wasn't even in the photo. But she tagged me anyway, and the comments poured in: "Stay strong, Clara. You're so brave." I hated it, the invasion, the exposure, the way my pain was suddenly public property. But when I told her I didn't appreciate it, she said, "Oh, honey, I was trying to make people support you." "You're welcome." That's when I realized Rachel didn't comfort pain, she curated it. Still, I stayed silent. Because I didn't want to make Tom choose between us. Because I'd spent my whole life believing that keeping the peace was better than being right. I told myself Rachel wasn't malicious, just misguided. That she wanted control because she was lonely, or insecure, or trying too hard to matter. I excused her until the excuses became a prison. By the time I got pregnant again, I was exhausted from walking on eggshells, but still too scared to break any. Rachel threw herself into my pregnancy like it was a project. She called my producers to help coordinate maternity coverage. She picked out nursery themes I never asked for. She said she wanted to host the baby shower, to make up for last time. And after a lifetime of wanting to be accepted, I said yes. That was my mistake. Because when Rachel smiled at me that day, surrounded by the pastel decorations and carefully arranged photographers, I mistook control for kindness, again. And that's how the stage was set. The weeks after the baby shower scandal blurred together like a fever dream. Every ping of my phone felt like a bruise. Each notification, each message, each article headline was another reminder that my private joy had been turned into a public circus. The network suspended me, pending review. That phrase haunted me. Pending review, as if I was a file on someone's desk instead of a person whose life had been gutted overnight. They said it wasn't punishment, that they just needed to protect the brand. But I was the brand. Or at least, I used to be. Tom tried to comfort me at first. He said it would blow over, that the internet forgets fast. But as the days passed, he grew distant. The tension between his loyalty to me and his loyalty to Rachel stretched until it snapped. "She didn't mean for it to get out," he said one night, voice soft, almost pleading. "She gave it to them, Tom. She said someone else leaked it. She just sent it privately to a client." "Why would she send it to anyone?" I interrupted. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't know how media works. It's complicated." That's when I realized he wasn't defending Rachel. He was defending the system that kept people like her powerful, the unspoken rule that appearances mattered more than truth. The silence between us thickened. At night I'd sit in the nursery, staring at the mobile spinning slowly above the empty crib, wondering what kind of world I was bringing my child into. My reflection in the window looked foreign, swollen eyes, hollow cheeks, a stranger wrapped in guilt. 2 weeks later the station released a statement thanking me for my service and wishing me luck in future endeavors. They didn't even call. My entire career ended with a press release. I wanted to fight, to expose Rachel, to scream the truth. But I was pregnant, unemployed, and bone-tired. Fighting would have meant living in the same toxic theater that had already swallowed me. So I left. I packed a single suitcase and moved into a small apartment on the north side of the city. The place smelled faintly of paint and rain. The floor creaked like it was learning to hold me. Tom stayed in the house, saying he needed space to think. That was the last meaningful thing he ever said to me. I spent the first month in near silence. I canceled social media, changed my number, ignored the reporters who still emailed for exclusive interviews. Some nights I'd stand on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like a constellation of second chances, and whisper, "You're free now." But freedom felt a lot like loneliness. Then one morning, while scrolling through job listings I couldn't apply to, I saw a posting for a community radio producer at a local non-profit station. It wasn't glamorous. It paid less than half of what I used to make. But it sounded honest. The first day I walked into the studio, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice like warm tea greeted me. "I'm Lila," she said. "You must be our runaway anchor." I blinked. "How did you?" "Chicago's smaller than it thinks," she said, smiling. "Don't worry. Around here, we tell stories that matter, not ones that trend." Lila became the first person in years who didn't want something from me. She asked about my ideas, not my ratings. She noticed when I was quiet but didn't pry. She gave me space, the rarest kindness of all. The station was tucked between a bakery and an auto repair shop. It smelled of coffee, dust, and possibility. Every morning, volunteers filtered in, students, retirees, immigrants, each bringing fragments of their world to the microphone. They spoke about eviction laws, food insecurity, missing bus routes. Real stories. I started producing a segment called Everyday Voices. I interviewed single mothers, night shift workers, street vendors. They spoke about resilience, about getting up again and again even when the world didn't notice. Their strength humbled me. When I went home, I felt lighter. The noise in my head quieted. I still checked the news occasionally, half expecting to see my name dredged up again. But the internet had moved on to fresher scandals. I was invisible again, and for the first time, I welcomed it. Tom rarely called. When he did, it was transactional. Bills, logistics, the baby's doctor appointments. He never mentioned Rachel, and I never asked. The distance between us stretched until it felt irreversible. One rainy afternoon, while editing an interview, I felt the first contraction. I drove myself to the hospital, gripping the steering wheel through waves of pain. There was no camera crew, no family crowding the hallway, no carefully curated image. Just me, raw and trembling, bringing a new life into a world that had nearly broken mine. When they placed my daughter in my arms, everything stilled. Her tiny fingers curled around mine with the kind of faith I had stopped believing in. I named her Evelyn Grace, because that's what she was, grace I didn't think I deserved. In the months that followed, I lived quietly. Lila visited often, bringing homemade soup and second-hand baby clothes. "You're doing fine," she'd say, even when I looked like I'd been awake for days. Peace doesn't look glamorous, but it's still peace. I started freelancing, voiceovers, local ads, small documentaries. Slowly, my voice, once filtered through corporate polish, found warmth again. People began to recognize it on the radio. Not the scandalous anchor, just Clara, who listens. Motherhood forced me to slow down. At 3 a.m., when Evelyn finally slept, I'd sit beside her crib and think about patterns, how we inherit silence, guilt, and fear the way others inherit eye color. My mother had taught me to seek approval. Rachel had exploited that need. If I didn't unlearn it, I'd pass it on to my daughter. So I started therapy. The first session, the counselor asked, "When was the first time you felt responsible for someone else's happiness?" I said, "I can't remember a time I didn't." We sat in that silence until tears came. Week by week, I peeled away the layers, guilt, shame, the reflex to apologize for existing. Healing wasn't pretty. It was messy and slow. But I began to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing. You can forgive someone without letting them back in. By Evelyn's first birthday, I had saved enough to buy a small townhouse outside the city. Lila helped me move, humming as she unpacked boxes. "You've built this from ashes," she said. "That's no small thing." At night, after putting Evelyn to bed, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and scroll through job offers. A few stations had reached out quietly, testing the waters. But I wasn't sure I wanted that life anymore. The spotlight, the scripts, the pretending. I wanted authenticity. I wanted peace. Then, almost 2 years after the scandal, an email arrived from a national podcast network. They had heard my Everyday Voices series and wanted me to host a new show about women rebuilding their lives after public failure. The irony wasn't lost on me. I, the woman whose reputation had been burned alive by her own family, was now being asked to help others tell their stories of survival. I accepted. The show launched quietly but gained traction fast. Listeners wrote in, thanking me for giving them permission to start over. For the first time, my pain had purpose. One evening, after recording an episode about forgiveness, I checked my phone. A text from an unknown number blinked on the screen. "Clara, it's Rachel. Can we talk? It's important." My heart stuttered. For 2 years, I had imagined this moment, her reaching out, needing something, breaking the silence. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. My hands were steady when I typed back. "About what?" She replied almost instantly. It's about Mom and Dad. And Tom. Tom. The name I hadn't said out loud in months. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city outside hummed softly, indifferent to my heartbeat. Part of me wanted to ignore her completely, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But another part, the old Clara, needed to know. Needed closure. By morning, I'd made my decision. I wrote a simple reply. We can talk. One time. My office. Tomorrow at noon. When I hit send, a strange calm settled over me. Not fear, not anger, just quiet strength. The kind that comes when you finally realize the worst has already happened and you survived. I looked over at Evelyn playing with her blocks on the floor, her laughter bubbling like music. I smiled. Whatever Rachel wanted, she would no longer find the same woman she'd betrayed. I had built a new life from the ashes she left behind. I had nothing left to lose. And that, I would soon learn, was my greatest power. Rachel arrived 15 minutes early. When my assistant buzzed to say Ms. Vance was in the lobby, I felt my pulse tighten, but my face stayed calm. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years, and yet the sound of her name still carried the old static, like a frequency my body remembered too well. I stepped out of my office. She stood by the window, polished as ever, camel coat, diamond earrings, hair pinned perfectly. Time had been kind to her, or maybe she'd simply refused to let it show. Clara, she said, her voice soft but rehearsed. You look good. So do you, I answered, though my tone made it clear the compliment was not mutual. We sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with ghosts. She glanced around the modest studio, her smile brittle. So this is where you've been hiding. I don't hide, I said. I rebuild. She exhaled sharply through her nose, a laugh disguised as disapproval. Always had a way with words. I folded my hands on the table. You said you wanted to talk about Tom and my parents. Her expression shifted. The confidence cracked just slightly. Yes, Tom's not doing well. I waited. She looked down at her manicured hands. He had a heart issue a few months ago. Nothing major, but he's been struggling. And with Mom and Dad's situation. What situation? I interrupted. They're moving into assisted living. They can't manage the house anymore. It's expensive. Tom's been covering most of it, but his medical bills. And you came here for what? I asked quietly. Money. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. Help. Support. You've done well for yourself, obviously. We thought maybe. We. She hesitated. Tom and I. And the family. I laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. You mean the family that erased me when you decided my reputation was bad for your image? That family. Rachel's face stiffened. That was years ago. We all made mistakes. No, I said, my voice steady. You made choices. Silence. She shifted in her chair. You don't understand how bad things got. Tom's clients pulled out after your scandal. People blamed the whole family. It was chaos. I was just trying to control the damage. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. By selling my private photos to the press? Her lips parted, then closed. For once, Rachel had no script ready. I took a breath, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. You didn't protect the family. You protected your brand. You wanted to be the hero who cleaned up everyone else's mess. But I wasn't a mess, Rachel. You just couldn't stand that I existed outside your control. The clock ticked between us. The truth hung in the air, heavy but liberating. Rachel swallowed hard. Tom misses you. I looked away, out the window. He missed me years ago, and he chose to stay missing. I think he regrets it now. Good, I said simply. Her composure wavered. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. Tom, thinner, sitting beside our daughter at some family event I hadn't attended. My parents on either side, smiling faintly. He still keeps up with Evelyn. Sends gifts on birthdays. He doesn't know if you tell her they're from him. I tell her they're from her uncle, I said. Because that's all he is. Rachel flinched. I stood. Is there anything else? She didn't move. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered her things. You've changed, she murmured. I had to, I said. You made sure of it. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. My heart should have been racing, but it wasn't. The confrontation I dreaded for years had ended not in shouting, but in quiet certainty. I wasn't the woman she could wound anymore. That night, I called Lila. She came, I told her, and I listened. I didn't break. I didn't forgive either. I just let her talk. Lila smiled through the phone. Sometimes not reacting is the loudest response. But sleep didn't come easily. Rachel's words looped in my head. Tom's illness, my parents' failing health, the photo of Evelyn. Part of me wanted to slam the door forever. Another part, the one that still remembered birthdays and childhood silences, felt a pull. Not of love, but of unfinished business. 2 weeks later, I got another message, this time from Tom. I heard Rachel came to see you. Can we talk? Please. I agreed to meet him at a cafe near the lake, neutral ground. When I saw him, I almost didn't recognize him. His face had thinned, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. There was no anger left in him, just regret. Hi, Clara. Hi. We sat. The air smelled of coffee and rain. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry. For what? For not protecting you. For believing Rachel. For all of it. I studied his face, searching for manipulation, for performance, but all I saw was sincerity. And fatigue. She told me you were falling apart, he continued. That you needed space, that it was for your own good. I didn't realize until later that she'd done what she did. I should have seen it. You wanted to, I said softly. You just didn't want the truth to complicate things. He nodded. That's fair. For a long moment, the sound of clinking cups filled the silence. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said. I just needed to say it to your face. I still care about you. About Evelyn. I know, I replied. But caring isn't the same as doing right. He looked down. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I said gently. Because forgiveness is something I'm keeping for myself. A faint smile tugged at his lips. You've gotten strong. No, I corrected. I just stopped letting people convince me that kindness means surrender. When we left, he reached out to hug me. I hesitated, then allowed it. It wasn't reconciliation. It was closure. The past had finally lost its grip. A few months later, a letter arrived from my parents' assisted living facility. My mother's handwriting, still precise, still cold. Clara, we heard you're doing well. Rachel said your show is popular. We're glad you're stable now. We wanted to ask if you could help us settle some of the moving costs. Tom's been struggling, and Rachel has done so much for the family. We'd appreciate your contribution. Love. Mother. No apology. No mention of the years of silence after the scandal. Just expectation, like nothing had changed. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. That night, I burned it in the sink. Watching the paper curl and blacken, I whispered, I don't owe you any more. For the first time, it felt true. A week later, Rachel reached out again. The family wants to do a reunion. One last photo before Mom and Dad's move. Please come. Old habits die hard. Part of me almost said yes. But another part, the woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes, recognized the pattern. It wasn't about family. It was about Image again. Rachel wanted to script the ending. Instead, I sent her a short reply. I wish them peace, but I won't be attending. Her response came hours later. You're still bitter. That's sad. I stared at the message, then smiled. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I closed my phone and looked around the quiet studio where my life had begun again. On the desk sat Evelyn's latest crayon drawing, a lopsided heart with the words me and mommy. That, I thought, was my real family portrait. Months passed. My show continued to grow. Listeners wrote in from around the country, women, men, even teenagers, saying the stories helped them forgive themselves. The more I spoke, the less power my past had. Then one morning, a producer forwarded me a link. Rachel's PR firm was under investigation for data leaks and unethical client practices. Reporters were circling. The empire she'd built on Image was crumbling. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt instead was pity, because I knew that fall. I had lived it, and unlike her, I had rebuilt not by control, but by release. That night, as Evelyn slept beside me, I opened my laptop and began writing an episode script, not about revenge, but about freedom. I called it When Silence Stops Being Safety. The first line read, sometimes you don't win by fighting back. You win by walking away and letting the truth echo on its own. When I finished recording the episode, I felt something loosen inside me, a thread finally cut. The story of Rachel, my parents, Tom, all of it, it wasn't my identity anymore. It was simply a chapter. And as I turned off the studio lights, I realized the power had shifted completely. They might still whisper my name in bitterness, but I no longer belonged to their story. They, however, would always belong to mine. I never planned revenge. I'd promised myself long ago that if I ever confronted the people who destroyed me, I wouldn't become them. But when Rachel's firm began unraveling in the headlines, I felt the universe pause, as if waiting to see what I would do. The stories were small at first. Whispers of stolen data, leaked celebrity contracts, mishandled charities. Then came the exposé, an investigative journalist revealing how Rachel's firm had built its empire on manipulation, blackmail, and personal information traded like currency. Every line I read felt eerily familiar. It was the same pattern, the same hunger for control, only now it was public. I closed the article and stared out the window of my studio. Rain streaked the glass, tapping a rhythm that reminded me of the night I'd first realized Rachel had betrayed me. Except this time, I didn't feel broken. I felt ready. 2 days later, my producer told me a journalist wanted an interview. About what? I asked. She said she's doing a piece on unethical PR practices, my producer explained. She mentioned your name. Apparently, you used to be one of Rachel Vance's clients. The irony nearly made me laugh. Once upon a time, Rachel had tried to erase me. Now the truth was circling back, asking to be heard, through me. I agreed to meet the journalist, Maya Patel, at a quiet cafe downtown. She was young, sharp, with eyes that caught every flicker of emotion. Thank you for coming, Ms. Vance, she said, notebook in hand. It's Clara, I replied. She smiled. Clara, then. You don't have to talk on record, but I'd like to understand what kind of person Rachel really is, beyond the headlines. I looked out the window for a moment. The city was gray, soft, forgiving. She's someone who confuses control with love, I said finally. And she's very good at making other people believe that too. Maya leaned forward. Did she ever do anything to you personally? I paused. The old instinct, to protect the family, to stay silent, stirred in my chest. But silence had never protected me. It had only fed her. Yes, I said. She leaked private photos of me, ones taken at a baby shower she hosted. She told people I staged them for attention. I lost my job, my reputation, everything I'd built, and she watched it happen. Maya's pen froze. Did you ever confront her? Eventually, I said. But I learned something. Sometimes confronting someone doesn't mean shouting. It means standing there unshaken while they realize they can't break you anymore. Her eyes softened. Would you go on record? I hesitated. 4 years, I'd avoided tying my name to that scandal again. But then I thought of Evelyn, of what it would mean for her to see her mother tell the truth without fear. Yes, I said. You can use my name. The article went live a week later. The headline read, "Behind the Smile, the Human Cost of Rachel Vance's PR Empire." My section wasn't sensational. It was measured, honest, a reflection, not an accusation. Maya had written it beautifully. She described how I'd rebuilt my career, how I'd turned my experience into advocacy for women navigating online defamation. The story went viral within hours. But not because of the scandal, because of the grace. People commented not about revenge, but about resilience, about healing. And that's when I realized this was my revenge. Not screaming, not exposing, not humiliating. Living better. Speaking truth without venom. Becoming what they never expected me to survive long enough to be. A few weeks later, I got an email from a nonprofit that supported women rebuilding their reputations after digital abuse. They wanted me to join as a board advisor, to help shape programs that offered legal aid and emotional support. When I read the message, tears welled up. 4 years, I'd searched for meaning in what Rachel had done to me. Now, meaning had found me. I accepted immediately. The first event we hosted was called Reclaim the Narrative. It was a small gathering of women who'd been publicly shamed, doxxed, or humiliated online. As I stood in front of them, I spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor. I once thought silence was strength, I said. That keeping your pain private made you dignified. But silence only feeds the people who hurt you. Speaking out, calmly, truthfully, without hate, is how you take your name back. When the applause faded, I saw a woman in the front row crying quietly. She mouthed, "Thank you." And for the first time, I felt peace rising inside me, not the fragile kind that depends on apologies, but the kind that blooms from purpose. Months passed. Rachel's company folded. Her biggest clients dropped her, and lawsuits followed. She gave a tearful interview about betrayal from within, claiming she had no knowledge of the leaks. But people didn't buy it. The public had learned to read between her lines. One night, I got a message from her. I saw the article. "Congratulations on ruining me." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "You ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." And then, for the first time, I blocked her. No goodbye. No dramatic finale. Just quiet closure. That was the moment I realized the truest revenge isn't destruction. It's indifference. A few months later, I got a call from Tom. His voice was frail, the edges softened by illness. "She's not doing well," he said. "Rachel." The stress got to her. "She's in a clinic." I closed my eyes. I hadn't wished that on her, truly. I didn't want her destroyed. I just wanted her gone from my life. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "She asked about you," he added. "She said she wishes she could undo it all." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Some things don't need undoing," I said quietly. "They just need understanding." He didn't reply, and we both sat in that heavy silence. When we hung up, I sat by the window, watching dusk settle over the city. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to fix anyone. Not even her. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting people back in. It was about setting yourself free enough not to care whether they ever change. That night, I wrote Rachel a letter I never planned to send. "Rachel, 4 years, I wanted you to feel the pain you caused me. I wanted you to understand what it's like to have your life shredded for someone else's image. But now I see, you already live in that pain every day. You built a world on appearances, and when it cracked, you fell inside it. I won't say I forgive you in the way people expect. What I forgive is my own blindness, the way I let your approval define me. I forgive myself for mistaking manipulation for love. And I forgive the version of you I once believed existed. I hope you find peace someday. But your peace isn't my responsibility anymore. Clara. When I finished, I placed the letter in a box with the few remaining photos from that fateful baby shower. The pastel decorations, the forced smiles, the illusion of family. Then I locked it away. That was my ceremony of release. My final act of revenge, not to destroy her, but to let go of her completely. A few weeks later, I launched a new podcast series called Unwritten Women. Each episode featured women whose reputations had been rewritten, by the media, by family, by betrayal, and who reclaimed their narratives. The show gained traction fast. Sponsors came, collaborations followed. But the most meaningful moment came when a listener sent a simple message. Your story stopped me from giving up. Thank you for surviving loud enough for me to hear it. That one message made every scar worth it. One crisp afternoon, I drove to my parents' old house. It was empty now, the windows boarded, the garden overgrown. Standing in front of it, I felt the past breathe around me, the old arguments, the silences, the invisible walls that had shaped me. I walked up to the porch, placed the key, the last one I still had, under the mat and whispered, I'm not coming back. Then I left. The drive home felt lighter than any journey before. Months later, I got another letter, this time from Rachel. It was short, written in shaky handwriting. I heard about your foundation. You're doing good work. I wish I'd known how to do that instead of pretending to be strong. I'm sorry, Clara. No excuses. No manipulation. Just honesty. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in that moment I understood this was the real victory. Not her apology, but my peace. That night, I lit a candle in the quiet of my living room. Evelyn was asleep in her room, her soft breathing a reminder that life had continued, beautifully, despite everything. As the flame flickered, I realized the cycle was over. The woman who'd once tried to destroy me had become irrelevant. And the woman she'd created, through pain, through loss, through survival, was stronger, freer, and finally whole. I whispered to myself, revenge isn't fire, it's light. And for the first time, I truly believed it. 3 years later, peace didn't look like I'd imagined. It wasn't applause, or headlines, or even forgiveness. It was mornings like this one, quiet, golden, full of ordinary grace. I was sitting in the backyard of our small home just outside Seattle, watching my daughter chase bubbles through the grass. The air smelled like wet earth and lilacs. A bird sang somewhere behind the fence, steady and unbothered. Evelyn laughed, her curls catching sunlight. Mommy, look, they're flying away. So are we, I said softly. In that moment, I realized that healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly, the way dawn creeps through curtains, unnoticed until everything's lit. After the podcast took off, the foundation grew faster than I could have dreamed. We renamed it Second Voice. What started as a small support network became a national project offering free legal aid and crisis counseling for women whose lives had been torn apart by online exposure or manipulation. Sometimes, when new members joined, they'd ask how it began. I'd smile and say, out of something broken. We had offices now, warm, sunlit spaces filled with plants, laughter, and women who refused to be defined by their pasts. My story had stopped being a wound. It had become a doorway. One morning, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a simple card. Clara, Rachel passed away last week. Heart failure. She left something for you. Tom. I sat for a long time staring at the words. My first reaction was silence. Not shock, not sadness, just stillness. The kind that happens when life finally completes a circle. The next day, a courier brought a small box. Inside was a single silver bracelet. Delicate, old, familiar. It was the same bracelet she'd borrowed from me years ago and never returned. Attached was a note in her handwriting. fragile but unmistakable. You always saw the world as it could be. I only saw it as it was. I hope you wear this again, not as a reminder of me, but as proof that you survived me. I held it for a long time. Then I placed it around my wrist. It didn't feel heavy. It felt finished. Later that summer, Evelyn asked if we could visit the park from the old pictures. She meant the garden where my baby shower had taken place, the same garden that had been the start of everything that broke. For years, I couldn't bring myself to go back. But now, standing beside my daughter, I realized it wasn't haunted anymore. The garden had changed. New owners, new flowers, new life. Children played by the fountain. The ghosts had been replaced by laughter. We sat on a bench, sharing ice cream. Evelyn pointed to the sky. "Mommy, what's that?" "A hawk," I said. "Strong bird." "Like you?" she asked. I smiled. "Something like that." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You're happy now, huh?" "I am," I said, "because I learned what family really means." Family, I'd realized, wasn't blood. It wasn't obligation or shared history. It was people who chose to see your light even when the world tried to dim it. For me, family was Lila, who stayed when no one else did. It was the women of Second Voice, who turned pain into purpose. And it was Evelyn, the small miracle who reminded me every day that love can be rebuilt from ashes. The ones who betrayed me had been part of my origin story. But they were no longer part of my ending. A year later, I was invited to give a keynote at a conference on digital ethics and emotional resilience. Standing on stage, facing hundreds of people, I took a deep breath. "I used to think my story was about betrayal," I began. "But it's really about evolution. About learning that losing people who can't love you right isn't a tragedy, it's liberation." The audience was silent, listening closely. Revenge used to mean making them hurt the way I did. But pain doesn't heal pain. "My real revenge," I said, "was peace. My real victory was building something they couldn't destroy, because it didn't depend on them." Applause rose, not the loud, chaotic kind, but a warm, genuine one that felt like a shared heartbeat. As I stepped off stage, Maya, the journalist who had first written about me, met me backstage. "You know," she said, "your story changed a lot of women's lives." I smiled. It changed mine first. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I wrote one final letter, not to Rachel, not to my parents, but to the woman I used to be. "Dear Clara, you survived what you thought would break you. You learned that silence isn't strength. Truth is. You learned that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And most of all, you learned that you never needed their validation to be whole. I'm proud of you. Keep building the kind of peace that can't be stolen. Me." I folded the letter, placed it in my journal, and closed it gently. On the anniversary of Rachel's death, I visited her grave. It wasn't out of guilt or nostalgia, it was gratitude for the clarity her cruelty had given me. The cemetery was quiet, dotted with flowers left by people whose stories had also ended, peacefully or otherwise. I placed a single white rose on her stone. "I hope you found the peace you couldn't find here," I whispered. I did. As I walked away, the wind picked up, soft, cool, almost like a sigh. I smiled, not from sadness, but from release. Now, years later, whenever people ask about my past, I tell them this. Pain was my teacher, but peace was my graduation. I don't hate Rachel. I don't hate my family. I don't even hate the years I lost. Because every scar carved space for the person I became. My daughter knows my story, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson. When she's old enough, I'll tell her that her mother once believed love meant being chosen. But real love, I'll say, is choosing yourself and still having room to choose others with kindness. On quiet nights, after she falls asleep, I step outside and look up at the stars. I think about how some lights burn long after they've died, their glow traveling years to reach us. That's what healing feels like. You might not see the light at first, but it's already on its way. I often end my podcast episodes with one thought, the the one truth my life has proven over and over again. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, remember this: peace is the loudest revenge. And every time I say it, I mean it just a little bit more.